That's the last page.
Well, good afternoon. You
Hi,
ready?
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So, let's talk about some crediting. It sounds like a very dry subject.
It is.
It probably is. But we think it's quite an important one, and we kind of came across this issue and started talking about this last year. To my defense, yeah, I have to say that it was very late at night, and Jose and me, we had discussed this before. So
I think this is us discussing the issue during the Warsaw conference, and that blanket is so the ideas won't fly away.
So basically, we saw that our team was kind of growing and the projects were growing. So we realized that we ourselves were very inconsistent in crediting. And people, of course, are discussing this, and they do agree that credits are due where credits are due. No, Lutzen. Giving credit is where credit is a must. But things are not that quite simple because, type design can be done by a single person working from a home office or by a whole team of professionals, each of them dealing with quite specific areas. Also, quite often you would come and ask a consultant to come in or do in-depth research and so on. And
yes, and there is an issue that we are not going to specifically address, but it has to be commented on. And I like this quote because here it compares making a typeface to things like making a major sculpture or a computer language. So basically, there is a duality to this. There is the artistic or technical part of making a typeface. So where is the idea? Where is the concept? Who is the author of that typeface? And there is something that it could be, in some cases, that the technicalities of the typeface, that is the programming of the OpenType features or other things, are actually the idea behind the typeface. So we are not going to draw a line that separates the intellectual property in design and non-design parts or technical parts, right?
no. And of course, the cherry on top of the cake here is there's a lot of inconsistent legislation about IP, but we are not really getting into that. Problems of crediting is not really new. This is, like, for example, there's Miklos Kies, whose matrices he left in Leipzig, and they were then later on wrongly attributed to Jensen based on a specimen sheet that was released by the Erhard Foundry, or the case of Romain Duroy, well, Philippe Grandjean, the punch cutter, did not really quite follow the committee's requirements so slavishly and actually produced a much more beautiful type. And of course, the many women in type production whose work was crucial, but was not properly credited. So why is crediting important?
By the way, you're doing a wonderful job so far. So.
I don't need your...
I wanted to go there and actually watch you do this. This is fantastic.
No, this is way too patronizing.
Come on. Anyways, this is important because of different things. But mostly we need to realize that some people has more responsibility and works more in a project than other people. And that has to be, there has to be a difference in the way we credit them. We need to have a hierarchy. We need to set up what the job titles are.
Well, it would kind of to improve, to make to understand what actually a job title implies, yeah? so to have a general understanding of that. Although there is a potential problem in that, because not always does the job title really
Matches, yeah,
associate, the level of authorship or matches the work involved.
But proper crediting will help us also deal with accountability. Who is responsible for what?
And today, within our very specialized field, there's much more freelancing going on than employment. And therefore, the association of work done, the involvement of the professionals in a project becomes even more important for their professional careers. So the kind of the crediting recognizes the contribution of individuals, that it's a team effort.
Well, generally, it will increase credibility for all the parts involved in type design. So proper crediting is important for that as well. And
Which is, sorry?
yes, go ahead.
Which is also quite, perhaps even more important nowadays with a lot of multi-script projects. Right. Yeah. So if renowned expert, let's say, or type designer is involved in the multi-script part of the project, then that will give a higher level of credibility to the people who judge or who view the typeface and will have their thoughts on, is this actually a typeface I feel comfortable with.
But generally, what we want to do is also try to raise the perceived value of a typographic product. Do we have anything else? No, that's it. So.
And sure, of course, it's a matter of karma and of respect, and acknowledge it. How is it currently done? Well, rather inconsistently. And what was interesting to see is there's actually not much of a difference between the big foundries, the big players, and the small foundries. And what I found from a very basic research was that quite often more like other parts, like illustrators, photographers, would be credited more than people within the design process. So you have the cases where the company, only the company is credited, or the main designer, or very inconsistent crediting within different materials of one foundry, or only as part of a description. And on occasion, though, you would get a more extensive crediting.
Right, so when we started discussing this more in depth,
we are perfect.
We're fantastic. We were rushing and we're fantastic now. So we went out to see what other industries were doing. The first industry we consulted was graphic design, because it's probably the nearest relative we have. So apparently, the graphic designers, they are not doing such a great job anyway. What they are saying, and this is part of the AIGA best practices guidelines, and they basically say, okay, you need to credit everyone who was involved, and that's it. Which doesn't help us much, because we already reached that conclusion.
So there's no real standard. They are not giving us much clues. And then there's, of course, the academic journals, who are much more strict. They use a variety of conventions across disciplines. But still, they can give us quite good pointers and clues as to how to approach the proper crediting.
In these guidelines that we found, they are talking really about authorship and not crediting. But we thought that it was interesting to see what they were saying. So you will see that basically they define authorship regarding they separate it into 4 items, and anyone who can check the four boxes, they get credited with the authorship. The first one is, of course, having done a substantial contribution to the conception, to the idea behind the project, right? The second one is, well, is what they did for it, if they drafted it, if they made it possible, or if they actually analyzed it and make criticism over it.
And was it actually finally approved, the version to be published? And yeah, also some kind of agreement on accountability of the aspects of the work.
Yes, this is one of the things that we were mentioning before, basically the accountability for each other's work that pops up again. The third industry that we reviewed is probably the one that has more experience in this. It's the film industry, okay? And they have developed this to a very fine standard, and probably part of this is due to the fact that many of the different roles involved in filmmaking, such as authors, editors, producers, they have grouped themselves into guilds. And each of these guilds advocates for proper crediting. For example, the Directors Guild of America permits that a film is lists only one director.
With some exceptions,
There are
as we were thinking about, okay, who's the exception? Well, Coen Brothers comes to mind, perhaps somebody else. But as Philip Lajek put it, no one will actually buy a font because who hinted it.
This is true, but...
So, but really, the detailed credits, let's say, the expanded credits, are important for the industry, probably more than for the customers. Yeah. So it's some kind of acknowledgement again, and of all the roles involved.
Well, this is what they're saying. Basically, this helps with all these things, with acknowledging work, hiring people for the future projects, right?
Yeah, like the professional development.
The credits for selling a film are in what they call the intro sequence, the titling sequence, or the opening credits, right? So they have opening credits are the method for selling the film, and the closing credits were really for the industry itself. It's not for the public.
But they also have like this billing block.
This bit down here.
So you still have the big credit, the big name, but further down. And this is a famous poster that was one of the first who started doing that?
It was one of the first that started using the billing block at the very bottom. And now you can see things that are much worse, probably.
So, of course, the order in which credits are built also generally kind of signify the importance of the actor, you know, and so on. So you see Schwarzenegger, obviously. And the kind of deaf,
can we get Fred please? I mean,
the deaf style Travolta with these kind of funny dots. One of the worst posters.
The other one that we checked out was the gaming industry. And this actually, I think, has a lot of points in common with our own work.
They kind of face similar issues.
Yes, but they take themselves much more seriously.
Well, and they're about 1,000 times bigger than our industry, or more.
And they make 100,000 times more money.
There's actually money in there, yeah.
Okay, well. So, around 2006, they got together to review how crediting was done in the gaming industry. And they produced a document that basically explains that they have categories, right, of roles. Inside each category, they have job titles. And then they use prefixes next to the job titles. So let's say you could have, in the programming role, the script programmer, but you have a lead script programmer, and you have an assistant script programmer, right? So this is the way they separated it. Years later, they produced another document that basically specified the way that crediting was to be applied. So they use these 4 items: inclusion, to see who deserves to be credited; attribution, what kind of credit they get, and how it is used, and how is the methodology to see, to collect this data, basically to see who deserves crediting or not.
So we were thinking perhaps there's a way of finding a standard, yeah, or at least starting a discussion about having a standard. Bruno sort of went and showed us how important standards are. So we kind of continue from that. And it might be even a possible way to stand out, you know. So it's about trying to find to develop a set of criteria and a system that works. So here we put together a few items or parameters we think are important for this. So one is, of course, it needs to be flexible, because our industry, we have big and small fishes. It should be fair.
Right.
Yeah.
It should credit people in accordance to the amount of work they do, basically.
Yeah. But also, in a way, forward-looking. The industry is changing, even perhaps not as fast as the tech industry, but there are, ideally, it needs to be forward-looking. So to accommodate changes in the future.
And it should allow to be commercially successful in some way, right?
And of course, the lawyers. So we don't want legal suits.
So
what we kind of thought came up with is probably very obvious. A kind of a 2-part system, sort of inspired by the film and gaming industry, as we said before. And so we have these 2 leading and development credits.
So this should translate like what we saw for the titling sequence of the films and the end credits. The titling sequence is what we mostly advertise and put out there for the customer and for the intellectual property sake. And the development, the credit, the full credit, let's say, is something that probably is not out there so loudly, but it allows us to, as an industry, to understand who has contributed to a project and what have they done.
And this is really meant to be just as a starting point. We are not saying this is the best system. It's just to give a basis for discussion. So under the leading, of course, one of the main points is the design. And here, all of these can be one person, but it can also, in a bigger project, can be several people. But those are the ones that really conceive the main idea of the project.
Yes, in those cases where the publishing company is also, let's say, is part of the sales effort, because the company, the publisher actually implies or gives a seal of quality to the product, then it could be there as an option. But this is on the leading title side. On the development side, we have, again, categories. Each of these categories can have job titles, and then we can have prefixes, the same as the gaming industry.
Again, these are categories that we think are valid. We happily discuss that, you know, and see if something should be added or something should be removed.
Yes, I want to point out that the acknowledgements at the very end is for those people who, let's say, they didn't work on the project, but they somehow contributed, and that you want to put a special thanks to, there is when we can do it.
And so to question where these credits should actually appear, because obviously you won't have, in a little brochure specimen, you won't have space for all of the credits, right? But so you can also split that into the leading and development, and the designers, they should always be there, definitely, in every possible application there is. And of course, the designer field and the OpenType features. For the development, here we have several options, but now with websites, with like a full documentation, why not adding a few lines of the important people involved?
Next week we will release our first font that will go with this system of crediting. And for the special OpenType tables, we have used the description field of the naming table to actually have a full list of credits inside the font itself.
Yeah, so, you know, help us continue this. We will be there.
So, yeah, please contribute and just let us know if you have other ideas. Probably this should be something that we would like to discuss within the ATypI. And I think that's all.
That's all.
Thank you.